Well, good afternoon, friends. Welcome. My name is Doug Bouws, and I am Vice President for Client Services with Money for Ministry. So glad to be with you this afternoon for this webinar, Make It Meaningful, How to Build a Lasting Relationship with Your Donors. And we have a special guest with us today, Tom Hooper of Nimble Connect. I think, we live in a world where there's always so much more to do, and maybe there's something you feel that's really hard to do and hard to measure, and that's the depth of your donor relationships. How do you know when you've done enough? How do you know even what actually is enough? And how do you create those benchmarks to help you measure yourself against that? Well, believe it or not, Tom has given a ton of thought to those questions, and he's here today to tell us more about that. And we're going to learn why the relationship is so important, what needs to be done to meet base expectations in the long term, and the short term, with some strategies to help make your organization a donor's favorite. So I'm excited. I hope you are. Lots of good stuff in store for you today. As folks continue to log on, I just have a few items of interest and some housekeeping details. There are two buttons at the bottom of your screen that you're going to want to be aware of. There's a question and answer box, and that will be used throughout the webinar. If you have a question, something you've heard that you want to learn more about, type it in. We will plan to address those for sure. At the end, we've set aside a good 20 minutes to take your questions and to try to provide some answers and some insight into whatever it is you want to know more about. But we might even take them up in the middle of our presentation if it seems appropriate as well. So make good use of the question and answer box. There's also a chat window, and that's for you to engage with each other throughout the webinar. And how about this to get us started today? State where you're calling from and the temperature outside today. I happen to be in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the weather station on my deck outside my house says it's 78 degrees right now. It's a wonderful, beautiful day here. So go ahead, you can start typing now where you're calling in from and what's it like outside. I'm kind of curious to see where the coldest and warmest spots are today. And then finally, stay tuned later in the call. You can sign up for a free consultation with either Tom or someone from the Money for Ministry team to learn more about anything you heard today. That'll be coming later. And did I mention the webinar is being recorded? So if you registered, you will automatically receive an email that says that is a link to the recording. So you can share it with your team. If you weren't able to be here live, you'll be able to watch it that way as well. All right, I'm looking at some of the folks who have written in on the chat. It's only 64 in Tustin, California, 86 in Florida. I'm looking to see if there's anybody who's colder than, there's somebody 60 in Seattle. That's about it. Overall, it looks like it's a pretty nice day around the country. So anyway, thanks so much for adding that in. I'd like to welcome our guest today, Tom Hooper. Tom has dedicated his career to the nonprofit sector and understands the importance of building meaningful relationships with your donors. His passion.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
Yeah, Tom, it's great to be here. I was going to say a little bit more about you, but why don't I just turn it over to you, because you're probably better at that than I am. We're so glad to have you. Tell us about yourself. Tell us about your organization, and how'd you get started in this really unique niche of donor relationships?
Oh, you bet. Well, again, my name's Tom, and my company is Nimble Connect. And Nimble Connect was born out of a need that we had with one of our clients, was working with the agency side. And essentially what I did is, coming out of USC, just a little more background, is I've been in direct marketing wholly since USC, a little over 20 years ago or so. And so in the last 15 years, I've been strictly in the nonprofit space, working with agencies and guiding strategy on fundraising for multiple many dozens of different nonprofits around the country. And in the process of doing that, and noticing some of the drastic trends that happened after 2008, specifically 2010 and onward, that acquisition costs were on the increase. the retention was on the decrease. And in working with one of my clients, and also, studying the backgrounds of how to solve some of these problems, we realized quickly that our clients needed to, and we advised them to get on the phones, to start talking to their donors, to develop a relationship, and that this is going to be critical to actually making sure that they stay on board. Well, in the process of doing that, we realized that there's so many hats being worn by so many folks in these organizations that to actually coordinate that was a real difficult challenge. So Nimble Connect was born to solve for those issues. Would you like me to go into a little more about that, or more about background?
Yeah, sure. Well, one quick, so you mentioned USC. Can you just say exactly what that is? I'm not sure if all our listeners, I think of a university that I'm not so fond of, but if you want to say a little more about that, go ahead.
Is that university in South Carolina?
I'm thinking Southern California, but
well, guilty as charged. Yep, I'm a Trojan.
Oh, okay, all right. So it is true. All right. So I didn't. Okay, I wasn't sure what you.
Had you known, Doug? Had you known? Yeah. When I was going to business school there, direct marketing was my true love, and I never thought I'd be in the nonprofit space. But I had the opportunity shortly after I was saved, and my family and I were really starting to get into the Word and attend church and gear our family in that direction. I got laid off because God's got His plans, and didn't feel good at that time. And I had a few job offers, and I was told, and this is one of the first times that I really felt a clear message. I was told, you should need to go work with the nonprofits. Never mind that it's the furthest one out and it's the least paying. That's not what you're here for. I'm like, oh, okay, all right, so let's do that. And it's been absolutely glorious. And I feel like everything that I did with the agency and the fundraising, as well as what we're doing with Nimble Connect, is, we're a business, but we're a ministry through and through, from many different angles. And hopefully I can illustrate some of that along the way.
Well, and maybe that's a good point to go into. I think you've talked to me about how this was really a functional operation morphed into a spiritual mission. Maybe you could say a little bit more about that and kind of the background to Nimble Connect.
Yeah, okay, then that's a good segue. So Nimble Connect, what we do, to give you some a framework, what we do is we actually work on behalf of nonprofits, right, to do thanking and gratitude phone calls and real pen written notes to donors within a week of their donation being provided. The way we came into that, so we do calls and we do cards, but mainly we do gratitude and relationship strategy. And we have some programs that help along with that. But the way we got into that is, as I was mentioning earlier, that I had a client, and I was on a client visit, and she was very excited after having numerous conversations about this very thing, about retention, and she was bought into the idea of doing these phone calls and making sure that the thank yous were going to happen. Took me a tour all around their campus to the different departments. And along the way, she's saying, this person's going to be involved. This person's going to be involved. And I saw, as I was meeting these folks, that they hardly knew what she was talking about, but she had a vision that all these folks were going to get together annually, put together a teleservices campaign, and they were going to thank you call once a year. And 3 years later, it never got off the ground. That's not her fault. She had too many things to do, and that's most of the people that are watching this likely have too many things to do, and that's when Nimble Connect was born. We're on agreement from day one when donor-centered fundraising was published, and that study about board members calling to say thank you to donors showed that they actually giving increase happened. I was in, and this was a solution for that particular client. Problem is, they can't do it on the ground, and as an agency, it was very difficult to do when they're focusing on fundraising, to do relationship. And I realized nobody was in that space, and so that's why we are doing what we're doing. We don't do fundraising; we do just relationship. And I'm glad to tell you that that the person that took me around and that is one of our strong clients today, and they're doing really well with it. So the problem being solved is retention. And of course, one of the things along the way is that we discovered that just doing thank you calls. This is before we even had the cards. Increased giving for the folks that were given thank you calls. This is in cultivation, increased about 30% over the year. That paid for the program because everything we were doing, we tried to keep it under 1% of the revenue that came in for those donors. Another thing that we discovered is that we really needed to do these thank you calls very, very close to when the gift was given, right? And so that helped. And we discovered that actually was the secret sauce to being able to make sure that we don't call annually, but that we call close in proximity to the gift being given. To your question, the spiritual nature of it, I started to solve a development problem. But I started getting just the most amazing sideswipes. I got 2 different emails from 2 of our, what we call donor ambassadors. And each of them in their own ways say that we saved their life. Like, what do you mean? Just them being able to be on the phone and express gratitude. Each one of these folks lost their husbands and hadn't smiled for a long time. They had a very common story, and that making these calls and being able to talk to all of these organizations' donors was just the bright spot in their life. And so we have a lot of wonderful people that are deeply dedicated. So that part is a ministry, ministering to our own donor ambassadors and making sure that this is what they want to do and that it's their own ministry. So it's been quite a journey. So between that, helping the organizations themselves and those ministries, as well as, as we always like to say, we work for the donor. The organizations, they happen to pay us for that. Because it's about that donor relationship.
Okay, nice. Well, you started to hint at this, but you've talked about solving for some of these development issues that your clients can't seem to make happen on your own. I wonder if you could dig a little deeper into some of the fundamental issues that you're trying to solve, the relationship between relationship and retention, maybe some numbers, studies, some anecdotes that demonstrate why these relationships are so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I touched on a couple of those. I kind of went around with your question there, but it's relationships at the core of everything that we're trying to accomplish, and it should be at the core of what organizations today are trying to accomplish. I just watched a seminar yesterday, and Andrew Olson, who works with Dickerson Baker, brought up an incredibly good point. That decline that I saw over since 2008, 2010 to today in donor retention and acquisition costs, he put a little finer point on it and said that it really can spell disaster. We do have a shrinking giving population. Luckily, that population, and most donor files will reflect this, are giving more per donor, which is great news. However, it is shrinking, and that anybody that doesn't, he made this point, and he put his career where his mouth is. Anybody that doesn't concentrate on relationship at this point is really is going to have a hard time of it. They're going to have a hard go of it, because relying on these fabulous agencies that bring top of the funnel donors in and doing excellent jobs at acquisition aren't going to be enough. Retention is going to be the name of the game. It has been for a long time, but it's only going to get worse. And I say relationship because if you're not sowing an actual relationship, one that fosters trust, right, communication, something that they, factors of that they can count on, respect, generosity. If you're not sowing those relationships, you're really going to be missing out on a lot of those attributes of the donor that won't come out unless you give it a good try. So from a relationship standpoint, let me just go real quick. I had some thinking to do here because I want to dig a little deeper for this. When it comes to relationship, we have family, we have relationships with our friends, we have relationships with our business coworkers, and each of them have their own little attributes, right? You're going to have ethics with business partners. You're going to have shared experiences with friends. You may not have the same politics when you grow up, right? But friendship has a lot of different attributes. But some of the the one common thing that threads through all of it is trust. And nonprofits right now need to be developing trust, and that trust is going to be developed through relationship. And because the three elements that I've isolated are trust, competence, and a shared purpose. And your donors obviously agree with the purpose of which you're engaged in, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't have given that first, second, third gift. They feel like you're competent. But one of the real issues that we're having today nowadays is the trust factor. Trust used to be a commodity you can count on with all the people around you, but trust is declining in the world with fake news, with AI. There's going to be a real trust deficit in the future, and getting ahead of that is going to be critical. So we put relationship and the heart of the donor and what drives them at the center of everything. And quite frankly, you're just touching on the surface when it comes to our services, right? To be able to be out there and try and say hello and thank you and get on the phone and have prayer requests, which is what we do with every single one of our calls. That's a starting point. But yeah, when you say digging a little deeper and solving for those problems, it really does have to do with that. But then what I shared earlier with some of the numbers, it does solve also for a lot of problems that are being organizations are being hit with. So for instance, in the cultivation and new donors, for cultivation retention, we've actually seen in cultivation retention an increase by about 24%, overall giving increasing by about 30%. And then we have a 27-month study that shows we had a 92% increase in second gift conversion.
Oh, wow.
So these things are highly impactful, and you have to set a deliberate plan in place to be able to make that happen with the donors. Let's see, you had did I miss any of your question there?
I just keep, as I'm listening and I'm reflecting, there's so much that I love at so many levels. Trust, for one. I mean, when we think about it in terms of the gift in the will, such a huge piece of that is factored in on trust, or is built on trust as well. So that part I love. But then I think too, and I heard you say this once before, I thought this was so helpful. I don't think any appeal or acquisition is written as a finger wave, but sometimes it can feel that way. And I think what I hear in this, and what I think you might be, there's something about the gratitude that brings a smile, or that somehow turns the corner in that relationship, that warms it up. I think that's what you're about. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's the premise of giving is think, and think again, right? And that's an axiom that's quite often used in the major donor world is how many times do we thank a donor? Well, as many times as you can, right? Then there's rules of thumb out there. I've heard 5, I've heard 7. But the whole point of those, and also all of the non-solicitation communication is to not just be, treat them like the ATM, and not just to be transactional in your relationship, but rather to hit to speak with them on other terms, on other impact reports, the thank yous and the gratitudes, and even getting involved in their prayer life. Like with our calls, I've seen many clients have prayer requests as part of their website. That's really, really solid stuff. And getting involved in their legacy giving, and being able to have those survey questions, and being able to speak more, or allow the organization to get into that part of their lives, those are all things that go much, much deeper. So as far as ratios, when I was working and advising in the fundraising space, I always said, try to at least have a 2-to-1 ratio. What are the two key touches you've had between any ask that you've had? For instance, in like an email chain, that if you're always asking, they're always going to be ignoring your emails, right? But if you're offering content within an email, and this is true with any communication, with the next one open rate in mind, then you are working towards relationship, and you're not just beating them over the head.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I wonder if we can shift. We've talked a bit about the importance of relationship, and I think our listeners probably agree. It's good to just state that so we're all on the same page. But in an ideal world, what are some of the ways that we can think about taking these donor relationships seriously in our overall development strategies? I know you've talked a little bit in the past about your mission statement, about donor respect, credit, important and meaningful communications. Can you say a little bit more about that?
I could say quite a bit about that. We have within the development world, we have segmentation. We have these different modes of delivering fundraising, right? You're going to have anywhere from the regular fundraising with direct mail to $10 and up donors. Then you're going to have the middle major gift area, right? That's segmented out. And then special resources are poured into that. And then we also have, major donors. You're going to actually have folks that are assigned to that. In an ideal world, you're going to have 150 folks under an individual major donor officer. All of these different modes are typically going to be under acquisition, cultivation, perhaps maybe a segmented out major donor budget, right? And then you have legacy giving and that piece of it. My contention is that from a mission statement level all the way to the budgeting itself, that relationship needs to be a budgeting line item. I've seen it, but I don't see it often, or not nearly often enough. I mean, if it's going to be the big difference that's made between where we were when we could just mail something out and supported everything the organization did, and having them take it and moving over to today, decades later, where relationship is going to be key, then I truly believe that's going to be that's going to be necessary to for any organization to take it seriously, right? Because where your treasure is, there too is your heart. It's true in this realm. If you don't budget it, then it's not going to happen, right? And what you hinted on and what we talked about earlier is about mission statements. I thought it was clever. I'm not quite sure how to implement it or where to implement it, but I have seen donors and the actual supporting the community outside the walls of the organization as being part of their mission in their ministry, right? That they can be a light unto the people that they're serving, both physically, and let's say a rescue mission, the homeless they're serving, or the folks they're feeding and housing, but a statement that mentions outside the walls that the ministry can be for the donors as well. And we were talking earlier about this. One of the unique things that we've had with phone calls that I've just absolutely loved. You asked earlier about my business as a ministry and how it's touched us. Oh, well, one thing is the donor ambassadors, and I mentioned that. But when it comes to the donors, it's wonderful to be able to call faithful donors, have a prayer request, and then our donor ambassadors have a lovely conversation, maybe a shared experience, and they're taking notes on it and sharing it with these ministries. But one of the things that really fascinates us and drives us is those folks that say, nobody's ever asked me for a prayer request. And things along those lines, statements along those lines are very, very common. Nobody gets offended. We've never had negative feedback in the years we've been doing this. But it always makes me wonder, and as far as kingdom work, just asking somebody for the first time if they would, had a prayer request, somebody that has, a shared, shared purpose with the organization. They want to support feeding. The organization does feeding or whatever it is that they have that in common. But what's not in common is the faith element that in some way is God using these calls and this relationship development to help the ministry outside the walls. So, those are some of the things that we love accentuating and we love to bring out as part of what we do.
Fantastic, Tom. Love it. I wonder, can we drill down when we were talking at a higher level? Drill down into those concepts? What are some things that people who are listening today could do right now to start to increase their donor retention through donor relationships?
Okay. Well, first of all, take it seriously. I mentioned that in the budgeting and in the mission statement, but there's a lot of fundamentals that have to happen. I think first and foremost, make sure that you're getting your gift receiving out, right? So we're going to go into the tactical here a little bit. Make sure that those gift receipts are getting out in a 72-hour window. And that if you're going to be doing thank you calls internally or through somebody like yourselves or any firm that you have, is to make sure that those are done within a week's time period. That's a perfectly reasonable time frame. Thank you notes. Okay, that's a little more difficult because, at what we do is anybody that's $200 plus, make sure that they have a handwritten thank you note. And of course, so monthly donors don't get inundated, we'll merge out and make sure they don't have more than 4 in a year, so we don't over solicit or over communicate. But those things are some good starting points. Some other things that you should consider are impact reports, right? Those can come in the form of newsletters, depending on your newsletter pacing. Newsletters are a great way to let people know, in the mass scale, what it is they're giving for, right? Where's their money going? But the impact reports can be a little bit smaller. They can be in the form of a postcard I've seen. One organization sent a postcard, just told a story about one person and went in a postcard and went out. And of course, it could be part of email series. So these are just touch points along the way. So you get the thank yous, impact reports. Some other things is making sure they get an annual report. Do they look at it? Maybe. They might already be bought into what it is you're doing, but it's the trying, it's the effort, it's the thoughtfulness. And, the bottom line to a lot of the relationship development ideas that are out there, and when it comes to execution, is making sure you execute, not have just a few ideas and, to put a strategy behind it according to different segment levels and making sure you're not overspending against it, but to make sure you're actually doing some of the basics, thank you calls, the impact reports, the annual statements, those kind of things. Receiving the 72 hours. And then on the other side of it, and it's something that we really try to do, and this is big for relationship, is what is the actual payoff for the, what is the payoff that benefits the donor, right? So everything that we try to do doesn't have the appearance of trying to solicit anything, right? So what we'll do is we'll have prayer requests at the end of our calls, but we have some folks that say, well, we don't want to do prayer requests. What else can we do? Well, we'd love you to come down for a tour. We'd love you to come down for an event. It's all things that are offering something up to the donor. So those communications should be, thank you, and we appreciate you. And also, what else can we do for you? How can we serve other people in your community? Messaging like that. So inviting folks to graduation. If you have some culminating event with respect to your organization, like rescue missions or who have graduations with addiction recovery, invite donors to an event like that, or at least remote in to be able to do that. So fundamentally, you just need to make sure that those touch points are non-soliciting. At least on a 2-to-1 is what I recommend, but there's a lot of schools of thought on that. And also to make sure that these messages are clean. And what I mean by that is that you're not asking for anything.
Yeah, awesome.
Those are just a handful of the things that can be done.
Lots of good stuff. You said something at the outset that I wondered, I'm not sure if we touched on you talked about the mission statement. I wonder if you can say a little bit more about how does the mission statement of the organization impact what you're thinking about here in terms of donor retention, donor thank yous? It
was more about what I was referring to. That was more about when a mission statement, specifically boils down to who it is you're serving and what you're trying to accomplish, right? And that sometimes, at some point, if there's a reconsideration of mission statement, I thought it was pretty remarkable, and I wish I could remember the organization that did this. I used it as an anecdote here, but that it was more to emphasize the fact that you need to be considering the donors themselves as part of your ministry, as part of being outside the walls. So I don't have an example on hand right here with me, but effectively, if almost like a budget itself, you have a mission, and that mission guides how you make your decisions, what you do, what you're going to do. The budget guides where you're going to put budget, what you find is important, Those are two parallel tracks of the same concept. It's where you're going to focus, and I really do believe that focusing on the relationships of the donors should be so high up in the priorities of the organization that it could very well become part of a mission statement.
Okay, that's helpful. I wonder if this is, and I wonder if a question might come from some of our listeners about this idea. I mean, you focus so much on the donors. Is there a caution in there? I mean, how do you make sure that, I mean, if the donors are part of your mission and they're part of in the mission statement, how do you continue to maintain that direction that you want to go without letting the tail wag the dog, so to speak, or the donors driving the strategy in a way that's not helpful to the organization?
Oh, that's a good point. And it's very current. That's a very current topic that I'm seeing a lot. As you can be a donor-centric organization without being a donor-driven organization. And there's a big difference between those two things. Being donor-centric is the tip of the hat. It's the courtesy. It's the appreciation, the gratitude, all those things that to beat relationship that a good relationship will have. Respect. When I mention the mission statement, that's a great cautionary tale. Donor driven is a totally different thing. There's a lot of organizations, I've seen it a lot in universities, where you'll have demanding donors, high level, large donors that will put so many heavy conditions on the gift that it's going to be onerous to the institution. And no, that's not what I'm saying at all. Yeah, those kind of things are to be avoided, to be sure. You really want the gift to align with the mission. And what I'm mentioning with donors, and I'm glad you offered that clarity in case there was confusion, is just to make sure that the relationship with the donor and the ministry to the donor is solid. That was a very good distinction.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's I appreciate that. Well, you've offered some really good ideas here. I wonder, if I could just summarize. I think you talked about donor receipting within 72 hours, donor-centric wording, calls, cards, visits. I mean, these are all just things that probably they're doing anyway. But I think what you're saying is this becomes part of making the relationship central, and it's not just an activity. It really is about that relationship, and an authentic relationship at that. I recall
right.
I recall you used once with me this idea of, the person that always talks to you or at you, but never listens to you. I mean, how do you walk away from that relationship and you feel used or once it was one-sided?
Yeah, and that's good. You're right. In a previous conversation we had, that's a great illustration of how relationships actually work in the real life. How do you do this with an organization? But the key is thinking about relationships that you have, or better yet, strangers that you meet, and it could be in some kind of mixer or some party where you're meeting new people. Maybe it's a networking event. And you can come away a couple different ways out of that conversation with a new person. It could be you're driving down the road and maybe talking to your spouse, like, yeah, I met with Frank, and Frank was just talking about himself, and he had no interest in what I was about, and I felt like he didn't even listen. And you can think about all those attributes of that one-on-one conversation, and did that go well or not? But then if you're driving away and you're talking to Jim, and you came away, Jim, wow, what a listener! Wow, he was engaged with what I had to say. And How to Win Friends, Influence People. One of the functions in the opening chapter was a bunch of folks at a party, right? There's a Dale Carnegie observation. They were at a party, and one of the people at the party said, "Oh, so and so was awesome." Forgive me if I'm butchering this, but I'll get the principle right. It's so long since I read it. But such and such person was so great. What a fantastic conversationalist. Well, the fact of the matter is, they sat there for an extended period of time, and that person never said a word. All they did was listen, and they were deemed a great conversationalist. So in that way, just having consideration for donors' needs, donors' wants, having an ear to the ground is always going to be, one of the most sound things you can do. So it's thinking about donor relationship in the framework that what is the person that you drive away being impressed with, and what are the ones that you aren't impressed with? Which one do you want to be as an organization? Right? Follow those principles. You can always tap back to some personal anecdote in your own life that's going to hit on that principle. It's a good way to remember and frame how you want to act. What's interesting is some of the comments that came in, or some things that people wanted to talk about is how do you start? How do you set a meeting? And a lot of it seemed to be nervousness around how the donor thinks and feels. And I think what's interesting about that, again, a framework to think about, is that the donor knows their role, and the donor knows your role. And so often, especially in I've heard this in major donors a lot, is they're just waiting for you to do your job. Right. Then what that is what I mean by that is that they know you're working with an organization, nonprofit. They know that an invitation should be coming. It's not like you're the only nonprofit they're working with, or as a major donor, or the only one they've heard from. But just like with a major donor and getting that appointment and making that ask, when it goes all the way down into we're on the fundraising side, when it goes all the way down into the appeals and the offers, you get to the point, right? They know why they're there. They know why you're there. So any nervousness around having this relationship with the donor, or talking about your organization, or having money at the center of that organization, or of those conversations about the organization, they know. Give them some credit. I think that's one of the biggest things that I've heard over the years that can loosen up the nerves within a donor conversation.
They're expecting that. That's part of the
exactly. Yeah. There's no surprises. You're going to ask them for something. You're asking them to believe in something you believe in. That shouldn't be hard. If you truly believe in what your organization does, that it should be, you're working on blessing them through a gift. And that's the whole thing behind what you guys do, with the legacy. You're part of their legacy. The organization is deep in their life at that point.
I think that's really important, Tom. I really appreciate how you that last segment, how you talked about, because I think the temptation is to say, the hope is that this is the thanking that it is really about an authentic donor relationship. But the cynic among us might look at this and say, it's just another tactic to get more money from our donors. But I think what I hear you saying is, what it really is about is this authentic relationship. But we know that the relationship at its heart involves some invitation to invite you to participate, yes, which includes your finances. And that's okay, because that's what they're expecting.
It is okay. That's all right. It's nothing to be nervous about. And that's a great point. It's something I wanted to talk about that I actually missed. Is there's a couple of different modes of the of these communications that you're going to have with donors. One is what I like to call the mechanized side, and then there's the hyper-personal side, right? And you're gonna have the social media, you're gonna have the standardized thank you notes, things like that. Those are things that I hate to say set it and forget it, because you should have some conscientious thought behind the strategies for each of those, of course. But those are automated and on a mass scale. And what a lot of what I'm talking about is that middle ground. It's giving the donor the opportunity to be heard. So when you reach out on the personal side, now come off of the mechanized side and come back to the personal side, and you're going to have the conversations, and you're going to have the notes and the thank you notes with perhaps a phone number on how they can call and personally talk to you. Just a hint there. Those become then full circle conversations. And so much is talked about in that middle ground relationships, especially middle major. Major donors, they're covered. They have somebody to talk to, right? That middle major, where you're bringing people up into the middle, to give them an opportunity to be heard, is critical. And so what we do is we're conscious about taking a lot of notes on the calls, and those notes work themselves into the system. And that each note that goes, and this goes along with some of the things you could do tomorrow if you're doing thank you calls, every single note that comes through, whether it's, you get this a lot, address changes or something like that, or some big deal like, can you take my husband off the mailing list? All the way to, can you send me something in the mail because I want to give again. Those are all things that happen every single day with these calls. Every single one of those things should be responded to. And the team resources can dictate what that looks like. When prayer requests come in, we say acknowledge the prayer request. Send a little card to acknowledge the prayer request personally. Have the prayer team have some cards sitting there in the middle of the table. These are full circle communications. And boy, does that $25, $50, $100 feel hurt, right? And if they have capacity and you're doing that with them, who are they going to give to? Of all the 5.3 organizations that they're likely giving to, I think that was a national average last time I looked. It's probably different.
All right.
But if, of all those organizations, who are they going to dial up their giving to? It's going to be somebody who hears them out. So any way that you can, and it's not going to be everybody. That's okay. But the ones that do come in, take them seriously, dedicate some resources to it. Again, budgeting, right? FTEs of staff to respond to these things. If they're budgeted, they'll get done. Make sure that they're going full circle with all of these little tiny communications, because you never know what they're going to turn into. Not only that, if it's recorded in your database, then you're going to have some good fodder for case statements for upgrades and major donor conversations in the future.
Thank you, Tom. This is so helpful, and I just appreciate, from our perspective at Money for Ministry, I think what you do is so aligned with what ministries need to do who want to increase folks who are considering and eventually do or have already included the ministry in their will, because it's all based on the same principle. The people who ultimately do this are the folks that feel like they're in a partnership. To leave a gift in your will is essentially to say that this ministry is now my heir. They're part of my family. Sometimes we talk about this idea of the child named charity, the idea that if you have 3 children, you create a fourth and it's your favorite charity or charities. But it's all predicated on this trust that you've talked about that's already happened, that is built over time, not in a moment, of course, but
right.
It leads to this sense of shared purpose and shared ministry together. So I think it's wonderful concepts that you've talked about today. I wonder if we can to switch and we have some questions here from listeners who have both registered, and then of course, if anyone has anything coming in from what they've heard today, they want to post in the Q&A, we would love to take that. Before we transition to a time of question and answer, I do know that Janie from our team is going to put a poll up. If you would like to receive a consultation with either Tom or someone from the Money for Ministry team to learn more about anything you've heard today, you can click in that poll, and we will that will be a way for you to request that. So you can, of course, click to make that go away if you just want to see us again, but that should be on your screen right now. So I wonder if we can start out, Tom. One of the questions that came in from a registrant and really anticipating, I think, what we've already talked about. I mean, we're talking about thank you calls, donor receipting within 72 hours, handwritten notes. All this stuff takes time, right? And that's right. That's the main thing. So how do you fit in meaningful donor communication when for most people their plate is so full already? How do you do this without making donors feel like a number? How does this happen?
Well, it's well, first of all, just an acknowledgement to somebody who will ask this question. It's almost everybody I've worked with has asked this question at one point. It's one of the reasons they're working with us, because they want to reach out further in their file. But prioritization, right? So you have to prioritize everything you have on your plate. Your number one goal, and this is, again, I hate to harp on this and wag my finger at people that don't want to budget this stuff, but where you budget, you pay attention, right? you have a budget for your position as a full-time employee, an FTE, and you have certain things that you're mandated to do. First thing is, don't make this something that's an afterthought, right? This has to be carved out of your 40 hours or your 30 hours or whatever it is, and to be very deliberate about it. And then within that context, prioritize what's the best use of the time that you can do, right? And so that's just for you. And for the individual asking the question is, do what you can, where you can, in the highest impact area. And then, of course, then it goes down into, after you prioritize, you can either automate. That's not very personal. I wouldn't recommend that as much as possible, but you have automate, which is some of your receiving and your thank you notes, and to make sure that those get off your plate and they're not something that's taking a lot of your time. The mechanized pieces that I was talking about, and eliminate. The automate, eliminate, or delegate is something that to really keep in mind when you're looking at scarce resources like your own time. Automating the mechanized pieces, but when it comes to the personal pieces, I always, just coming from the fundraising background, I always think about the donors and where they sit within the file, and what their capacity is, and those are real questions that we actually have to address, and make sure that top down that the right people are getting the attention. And so the delegate's going to be board members, and making sure you're selling into the idea that this is a very important concept for the organization. They need to be making some calls. They need to be making some notes, writing some notes. People love hearing from the board members, from your executive director to anybody in the upper echelon that can participate. And then work down the file like that, just to make sure that they're getting at least a call, maybe a note, maybe even a margin note within their the gift receipt with a personal signature for somebody who gave $500 and above. The bottom line when it comes to prioritization is just make sure you figure out all the resources you have in front of you, that you're going to be able to concentrate on this, and allocate it accordingly. And maybe next year you'll get more budget to do more of this, but don't kill yourself trying to be all things to all people. Do what you can, do it well, and do it to the folks that are the high priority, and work it on down. We personally at Nimble Connect, one of the issues that we're solving is we want everybody to be treated like a major donor, right? And that's on us. We have to put the economies of scale together such, and we have to make it affordable enough for small and middle organizations to be able to call all the way down to the $25 donor within a week of their gift being given. That's one of the things we concentrate on. But if there's no budget for that and you're a small organization, you got to concentrate from the top down and do what you can. But, make a plan and work the plan. There's almost no wrong way to give somebody attention and some love. Again, they just want to be heard, and they want you to make the effort.
Right. I wonder, you've talked about this a few different times, treating everybody like a major donor. I get what you mean, and I also wonder if we can just unpack that a little bit. Do you mean, would you take what does major donor treatment look like for a $25 a month donor? I guess that's really the question. Is it the same as it is for a $10,000 a year donor, or what?
Absolutely. You need to be having breakfast with $25 donors all the time. No, it's an expression to be able to make the point that you want to bring the more personal experience down through your file as much as possible, right? And those are always going to be limited by budgetary constraints and time constraints. That's the reality. However, if you want to think about what is the mountaintop, what is that high goal that we can aim for, it's to give as many people as much personal time and attention, taking not just leaving it to the mechanized part, but making sure that maybe it's not 25, maybe it's 50, maybe it's not 50, maybe it's 100, but you have to assess that as you go and set the goal in the future to get as much personal contact and even if it's perceived personal contact with folks as far down the file as you possibly can. It really, I'd say it's as simple as that, but those are hard decisions that need to be made, budgetary decisions and priority decisions. But
I think that's
The major donor aspect of it, no, that's just a term that's aspirational, right? And it comes from a real place. I got to tell you, the biggest objection I have to what it is we do, and this blows me away, is no, we don't want to call cultivation donors. We call new donors, we call them once a year in this bundle. It's like, well, we've already proven that almost has a negligible effect. It's pretty tough. You have to call within some reasonable time frame. We found that within a month. So recency is everything. And when it comes to treating them like a major donor, it's just trying to give them that personal touch as quickly as possible.
super. I wonder if we can shift here. Someone wrote in, what are some ways to keep donors engaged when we don't have anything new or newsworthy to share? I often feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over again, and I'm concerned it has lost its meaning.
Okay. Yes. By the way, gratitude, it never gets old. So that's number one. That's over here. Don't get tired of it. Gratitude will always work. But when it comes to content and things along those lines, and what you're going to say to them, you have as many stories as you have individuals you serve within your organization. It really is a call to get creative. I'm going to say 9 times out of 10 that the reason you may be feeling this way is because you've had messaging that's been given to you that is maybe the brand parameters for what you have to say. But within those brand parameters, you're going to have stories to be told. And those happen to be the most powerful things you can do. It's not the number of patients that we've had, or the number of graduates from the school, or the number of homeless fed in these aggregate numbers. No, people respond, especially if we're going to this personal relationship style. They respond to the individual stories. And so I guarantee if you take a couple hours, talk to folks that are working within the programs or working within the constituents that you're serving, you're going to have some stories real quickly. There should be no shortage with some creative thought. There should be no shortage of what it is you could talk about.
That's great. We find this is so true. Our group does surveys, and one of the things that we often ask for is, was there someone who was especially important to you in cultivating the desire for, let's just pick, helping people who are homeless and hurting, or Christian education, or whatever it is. And there's always the things people write in are always, they'll blow you away sometimes. Like you just don't even, if you could make it up, you wouldn't do near as good a job. I was reading one yesterday, and it was just 3 or 4 short sentences. But it was they said there was a Catholic nun who lived in my neighborhood, who introduced me to this ministry and taught me to pray for it. And I've been connected ever since. This was like in 1985. I mean, so wow. It's just pretty basic, I guess, right? I mean, there's
it is
profound and yet meaningful.
If we have time, I'll tell the story along the same lines, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
We have one organization that also has a radio broadcast, and that radio broadcast has been going for decades. I think since the 30s, if I'm not mistaken, 40s. Anyways, this person that we called, this woman we called, said, this is the first, or I actually told a story where she met her husband 30 years ago while listening to that same radio station at the gas station. And they met, they got married, and they spent their 25th anniversary going to listen to the radio program being recorded, because it was a weekly thing. And what saddened me and gave me heart at the same time that we're turning the corner is that at the end of it, she said, and this is the first time she's been giving this whole time. It's the first time she received a phone call. We're not going to have those people forever. And if anything should put a fine point on the why we should be concentrating on our relationship, it's something like that. Yes, she gave. That's awesome. Her heart was in it. But can you imagine what could happen if organizations just try a little harder, lean into their donors a little bit more, listen to them? The surveys are great. yeah, there's some touching stuff that comes back. We see it all the time. Sometimes these prayer requests get read internally, and a lot of tissues. Donors have their own issues, and if they have the heart to share it with you, and if you have a relationship such that you have that opportunity for them to share, it's all the better, whether it's a survey or a prayer or just a quick conversation.
I hope our listeners hear loud and clear just our belief that donor relationships matter, and I see this anecdotally all the time too. The ones that see the most growth in planned giving are the ones that already have some kind of donor appreciation, donor thank you process in place, and it
Absolutely
starts to the seeds have been planted. Now they're getting watered, and the fruit is soon to come. I see it over and over again, and it just reinforces to me the value of what you're doing and what these thank you calls and just this chance. I mean, think about a donor who you said 25 years and they had never once received a thank you call, and yet how important it was and how much it meant to them. That
was 60 years.
60 years. Sorry, 60. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Here, I think
yeah.
One more question here, and I think this is worth. How can I move from a phone call or an email relationship with a donor to an in-person meeting or visit? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, and it has a lot to do with being what I said earlier. A couple of things were coming in my head. One is being very deliberate about your goals within the individual donor. As if you have plans for a donor that you're targeting to come in, then my thought is you're likely working on a capacity that you've noticed that they're giving an X level and you want them at Y level. It's how the question is, how have you laid the groundwork? Do you have a relationship such that asking them to breakfast or to come in for a tour or something like that is warranted? If not, you can roll back a little bit further and have them come in with a tour and with an idea, make it a softer ask and not just the hard one-on-one. But if this person is a prospect that you have, again, you don't want to assume they don't know what you're about. Have the courage to simply ask them. Right? If I'm not going to presume, well, I have just presumed, but there are going to be many scenarios that you could come across where you want to have that invite happen with that person. I would just, have the courage to ask, because, if you don't, then that next organization will, because they're going to recognize that as a potential donor and somebody who's really ready to, make a decision to contribute, and you want it to be with your organization. So don't be shy, pull the trigger, and just speak it as, the best you could hope for, or not the best you could hope for, the best that I could, make it as personal with them as possible. Obviously, if you've had tie it into prior conversations, but make it as low key and easy as possible. But really, just the courage to ask is at the core of that.
Awesome. Hey, there's a quick stat question. You restated some stats earlier in the conversation. It ended with that, wow, 92% the conversion. I think the second gift conversion. What were somebody wants to get those stats down?
Yeah, let's real quickly. Yeah, this was a 27-month study we did just on thank you calling. It started, that was over a 27-month period, to be clear. And we have another one that we did for 12 months. At the 12-month point, we saw that for folks that got no call, had a 19.8% second gift conversion within that 12-month period, 12 months. And that the second gift conversion was up to 48.7%. And then with another client and a longer term case study that was, again, 27 months, it went 43% for the new donors with no calls. And that when we looked at that cohort traveling through the 27 months, we noticed it was a 93% second gift conversion. It's all over the map, I'm going to admit, and really at the core of how your organization is going to perform is going to be how well you're doing it now, and how much of a degree is a phone call going to bump that up. If you're absolutely ignoring all your new donors, this is going to have a dramatic effect. Right. And not that these people were ignoring it. They had some things going on, but so it's what is your starting point, and then what kind of impact above that are you going to be able to expect? It's going to be positive, and I think one of the key things is whether you're doing as an FTE and you're hiring staff to do this, or you have volunteers that are making these calls, or you have us do it. The break even typically tends to be under 1% return. In other words, just to make those calls, all you need to see is 1% increase in giving, and it's going to pay for itself. And when we see 30 to 1 ROI, it's paying for itself.
Well, thank you.
Do you think did that address the question? I wasn't exposed to what they asked specifically, but I want to make sure that I'm covering off on that.
Well, why don't I know who it is, and I'll check in with them, and if necessary, I'll put you two in touch so that you can explain that more clearly. It made sense to me, but I realized if we had more time, I would ask more questions about that study too, because it is fascinating the different ways in which you did it. But we are at the top of the hour here, and I just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and remind Money for Ministry and Nimble Connect together serve ministry-minded, faith-based, specifically Christian ministries and nonprofits, both Protestant and Catholic. So our heart is to see the church thrive and flourish in all its forms, and to see ministries like those that are represented here today be part of healing and the transformation of lives everywhere. So in that spirit, I'd like to close our time with words from a psalm, which is often a psalm of thanksgiving. And I want that to be our prayer for our time together. So thanks for joining us, and let's pray. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness, and come before him with joyful song. Know that the Lord is God. It is he who made us, and we are his. We are his people, the sheep of his pasture. Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and praise his name. For the Lord is good. His love endures forever, and his faithfulness continues into all generations. Amen. Thanks, friends, for being with us today. Have a great day.
Thank you.